Game changer, next level, holy moly. Why don't more people do this? People, you gotta stuff your meatballs. For me, meatballs are one of the more nostalgic foods because every time I have one, I always compare it to how my Nana used to make hers. And they were everything you want a meatball to be. They were light, were tender, and they were super flavorful. Well, the recipe I'm gonna make for you today may not be my Nana's meatballs, but they're stuffed with mozzarella cheese and they are delicious. I'm gonna start with our flavoring ingredients. You can see I've got a bunch of stuff out here. And I'm gonna start with some Parmesan cheese. I'm gonna grate 1.5 ounces. And the Parmesan is gonna be not only a flavoring component, but it's also gonna help to bind the meatballs together. I've definitely made meatballs before and they just sort of fall apart in the sauce, and then I just tell my kids it's a meat sauce. So again, I'm gonna grate about 1.5 ounces. Okay, my arm workout is complete and my cheese is grated. I'm gonna save my rind. You can just put it in a Ziploc bag in your freezer, use it for soups. You can use it for any tomato sauces you may make in the future. Adds a ton of extra flavor. I'm gonna chop some basil. I love to keep my herbs, especially the more delicate herbs, in a jar filled with some water, and I pop it in the refrigerator. I find that it's the best way to store the herbs because they don't get wilty, they don't turn black in the fridge, and I really think they last a lot longer if you store them that way. So again, I'm just gonna chop this basil. I'm looking for about 1/4 cup. And we're gonna use the basil in a couple different ways. They're gonna help to flavor the meatballs, but we're also gonna be using them at the end of the recipe as well. Now I'm gonna mince just 3 cloves of garlic. And similar to the basil, we got a rock in motion there. We're gonna use it in 2 different places as well. Okay. Now another thing that keeps meatballs held together is something called a panade. And that's usually a combination of dairy or liquid with some bread. But today we're actually going to be using some eggs and the cheese to be part of that panade, as well as some panko breadcrumbs. So I need 3/4 cup for that. Japanese breadcrumbs, also known as panko, are great. They're super coarse, they're really dry, they absorb moisture really well, and they don't get super soggy. All right, so I'm gonna take 1/2 cup of the parm that I grated, add that right in. Again, it's gonna help both with flavor, it's also gonna help to keep those meatballs cohesive. And I'm gonna add 2 eggs. I'm gonna add 1/2 of that garlic from earlier. And 2 tablespoons of basil. And lastly, I'm gonna do 1 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. You wanna make sure these meatballs are seasoned really beautifully. So give that a good mix. As you can see, that egg is really gonna act like that moisture element for our panade. It's gonna act as that binder. So in our meatballs today, we are gonna be adding Italian sausage as well as some ground beef. So I'm gonna clean up and I'm gonna go grab the meat. You're probably wondering why we have 2 different types of meat. So the sausage is gonna add a good amount of fat, and we're using 85% lean ground beef. So that also is gonna add a little bit of fat. And fat is good because it's gonna make sure that our meatballs are gonna be nice and tender. Now you'll see I just ran my knife down both of the sausages because I wanna take away that casing. So we want to get in there and knead the sausage and knead the beef with the panko mixture so that it's one cohesive mixture. And you can wear gloves if you're somebody that doesn't love to touch meat, but I'm just gonna get in there, you know? All right, now I have 1.25 pounds of 85% lean ground beef. And just like the sausage, gonna go in there and knead it thoroughly until combined. Meatballs can be one of those things too that you spend a couple hours making and you cook them in the sauce and it's Sunday afternoon and you're so excited to eat them, but it's always such a bum out when you slice into them and they just have no flavor at all. So I promise these are gonna check off all the boxes. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna wash up. I always have mozzarella sticks on hand because one of my sons, Willie, could eat 5 a day. But you could use other types of mozzarella if you could find that. This is just a very convenient thing for me to use. So I have 15 pieces total. I went ahead and cut the mozzarella sticks into 5 equal pieces per stick. I sprayed this 1/4 cup measure just so that the meat won't stick to it. And what I'm gonna do is get a 1/4 cup of the packed meatball, and spraying it helps the meat to come out relatively easily. So you want to kind of flatten it slightly. Put one of the pieces of the mozzarella cheese right into the center, just like that, and then pinch the meat right around the cheese stick. Now, you can use damp hands, you can use greased hands. I find that any kind of sticky thing like ground meat, it's easier to handle with either damp hands or greased hands. I'm gonna keep going with the rest of the meatballs, and I'm gonna end up with 15 total. I've got my 15 shaped meatballs and stuffed, and I need them to set up a little bit. It's an important step not to skip. So I'm gonna put them in the fridge for a minimum of half an hour, but you can actually do it up to 24 hours. All right, so I've got my chilled meatballs, and now what we're gonna do, I'm just gonna heat up some oil on medium-high heat until it's just smoking. I'm only gonna brown the meatballs at this stage because they'll finish cooking in the tomato sauce that we're gonna make. All right, that's good, 2 tablespoons there. Anytime I'm browning meats, especially like things like meatballs, I always put the first one just after 12 o'clock. That way when I go to turn them, I know which one started first and which one is gonna need a little bit more time because it was one of the last ones to hit the pan. All right, I'm gonna cook these for about 3 minutes until they're well browned on the first side. Now flip them over to the other side, and you're gonna cook this second side for about 3 minutes as well. Okay, so these are not cooked. Again, it was just the stage where I wanted to brown them on both sides. So I'm gonna leave these meatballs here. And then now I'm going to start to build our tomato sauce. I'm gonna use a nice sharp chef's knife, and then I'm gonna finely chop this onion. First step, as always, cut the root and the stem end off, and then just remove the outer layer of paper. And this is a relatively quick cooking tomato sauce, but because we're going to be cooking the meatballs in it, it's going to have a ton of that meaty flavor. So before I chop my onion, I just wanted to point out that I have a little bit of fat left in the skillet. So I have about 1 tablespoon that I'm just going to keep in the skillet because that's what I'm going to cook the onions in. If anything, it's going to give off a little bit more of that beefy flavor that we developed and left behind in the fat. So again, I'm going to finely chop this, put my hand flat to the top of the onion, parallel to the cutting board, and run my chef's knife parallel to the board through the onion a few times. Now, I'm going to run my knife this way a few times as well. And take your time here, there's no rush. And when you get to the point where the onion starts to feel a little wobbly, just turn that flat side right down. You can make some more cuts if you need to. Then you just have a little bit of the root end left. Using a bench scraper, I'm just going to transfer the onions to the fat left in the skillet. I'm not going to turn the heat on just yet. I imagine it's still pretty warm. And I'm going to repeat with the second half. Now I'm going to cook the onions over medium heat until they're just softened and beginning to brown, which should just take a couple minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to add the rest of the garlic from earlier, and I'm also going to add some dried oregano, about 1 teaspoon. Now I'm going to just cook this until fragrant, about 30 seconds. It's sauce time. I've got a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. This might splatter up at me, so I'm just going to turn the heat down just a smidge. I've learned the hard way. A lot of tomato stains in my life. All right, and then we also have the Parmesan from earlier. So it's about a 1/4 cup. I'm gonna add that directly into the sauce now. And then I need some salt and pepper. I'm gonna do 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt and a 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. So adding the cheese in there is really gonna also add a ton of flavor to the tomato sauce. We kinda need as much help as we can because it's a quicker tomato sauce. So leaning on ingredients like that definitely goes a long way. So I'm just gonna bring this to a simmer. All right, I'm gonna return the meatballs back to the skillet. Nestle them right in there because now they're gonna essentially poach in that tomato sauce. And they're gonna give off a ton of that meaty flavor. Smells so delicious. Okay, so I'm gonna reduce the heat down to medium-low and simmer for about 4 minutes. Be sure to cover it with a tight-fitted lid. Now I'm going to flip the meatballs. Oh yeah. And then I'm going to return the lid and cook for an additional 4 minutes. All right, meatballs have cooked. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna let them sit off the heat and let them rest for 5 more minutes. Okay, it's been 5 minutes. Let's see what we're working with here. Oh boy. Yeah, we had a couple leakages, but that's okay. I am gonna go for a middle one. Oh my goodness. The sauce looks like a beautiful texture. I'm gonna get a little bit for the meatballs. Perfect weeknight meal. I'm gonna sprinkle with a little bit of the basil from earlier. Add a little greenery. And then I'm gonna sprinkle the remaining meatballs with the rest of that basil. Yum, 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 yum. The time has come to take a bite. Come to mama. Oh yeah. Whoa. Oh yeah, babe, as Emerald would say. That is everything I've ever wanted out of a meatball. Oh my goodness. That's like game changer, next level, holy moly. Why don't more people do this? You've got to make these stuffed meatballs. Thanks for watching. The link for this recipe is in the description below. And I want to know, are you one of those people that is super passionate about your meatball recipe? Well, if so, let me know what your go-to method is in the comments below. See you next time.